now we move on to chapter 2 of this text, and this chapter is titled The Drive. This particular title or chapter talks about the time Mr. Bello takes a drive around the city, with his daughter. Of course, this particular chapter is a kind of flashback because it happened when Aliyah was 12 years old. You remember we said she's 16 now. And this particular morning, Mr. Bello wakes up and, after taking a shower, he asks our daughter Aliyah whether she'll be interested in following him. And we discovered that anytime Mr. Bello wants to have a random discussion or some important discussion with Aliyah, he will make that kind of arrangement. And this particular time, Aliyah will not even decline, because, she loves to go out with Dad. And she put on a shirt that has the inscription First Lady. And the book tells us of how this particular shirt was given to her by her dad when he returned from London. On this particular time, they enter into the vehicle and they drive around the city. And as they are moving along, they encounter two girls who are selling some items. And at this point in time, our father has a kind of reflection of how his childhood was. And he begins to tell Aliyah how his childhood, how hard it was that they had to sell items for their mother, and that even it's after selling that the next meal is guaranteed. And he talks about his own sister, and I'm talking about Mr. Bello. He talks about his own sister that Aliyah refers to as Big Mommy, how the two of them will hawk on the street and all that. And Mr. Bello at this occasion just pities, the condition of these young ones who will need to hawk all around on the streets, on the road, everywhere, to make ends meet. And at the end of the day, what do they get from all this labor? So they talk about this on the second page of this particular chapter. And after that, Mr. Bello just chips in, the discussion for which he takes Aliyah along. And he asks her, Aliyah, I learned from your mother that you've started your menstruation for the first time. And Aliyah was a bit shocked because she feels, her mom shouldn't have told her father. But because of whom Mr. Bello is, a caring father, a counselor, and, a father par excellence, if I may say, he takes it upon himself to tutor and even to mentor his daughter Aliyah. And that is what we see him doing here. And when he brings up this discussion, Aliyah feels like, she can't just hide that, but tell her father about it. And she even says that her hostel mistress and her mom have taught her how she needs to go about it. And she begins to feel a kind of new responsibility which a new age has brought upon her. And she talks about this particular issue. So now it's like an opportunity for her father to now chip in this discussion about sex. And so our father begins to talk about how Aliyah needs to be very careful, because Mr. Bello, that is Aliyah's father, tells her that Aliyah, you need to be very careful, because at this particular point in time, it's like your body is biologically ready to be a mother, and that is why you should be very careful of the opposite sex. And Aliyah at this point in time remembers one of her friends told her that anytime you enter into this stage, you don't allow boys to touch you, you don't play with them and all that. And Mr. Bello, Aliyah's father, comes in and tells his daughter that, look, the woman is correct, but that the daughter misinterpreted what the woman, her mom, was trying to say. That it's not that, they will not play with the opposite sex, but then they have to be very careful and should not allow anyone to touch their private part. That was exactly what the woman was trying to say, not that they will not play with the opposite sex. And Aliyah at this point talks about how she read a particular magazine titled Cosmopolitan, and this Cosmopolitan, you know, she got the magazine from Auntie Molara, because Auntie Molara happens to be her mother's sister who stays with them. And at this occasion, you know, her father feels like, oh yes, she has, you know, gotten some information about sex education, and Aliyah will not even want her father to be angry with Auntie Molara, her mommy's sister. So she has to beg her father. But even her father is not a type that will take an offense as that, because at a point her father begins to talk about how much she needs to be careful that sex is everywhere, on commercials, on advertisement, on social media, and all of that. And that even each time you open television, you see all sort of mess, you know, according to, you know, the language of Mr. Bello. And Aliyah says, oh sir, even on social media, if one doesn't watch television, what's on social media, even like Netflix, where you can download videos to watch and all of that. And so at this point, our father feels he needs to, you know, give tutorial more to Aliyah, who may not watch television at home, but then have access to videos on Netflix and all that. And at this point, our father begins to tell her that our hearts is like a beautiful room, and that all this information that are wrong at this particular age should be avoided, because that beautiful room, which our heart represents, you know, should not be tainted, should not be soiled, should not be defiled. And at this occasion, he wants Aliyah to be careful of what she reads, of what information she allows into her heart. And so the drive continues. And at the end of this particular chapter, we see that Aliyah, you know, remembers, you know, because like I said, this particular chapter is a flashback. So now, Aliyah now remembers all these particular instances, and she appreciates her father the more. Of course, at this occasion, the last page of this particular chapter, you know, Aliyah remembers Prophet Luqman, who happens to be, you know, a mentor, you know, a prophet to his own son. And she concludes that, oh, probably, maybe my father is also my own prophet. And as she begins to read the 16 pages letter that we said our father wrote to her in chapter 1, you know, tears begin to drop on her face. And at this point in time, you know, she feels more love for her father and sees her father as more than a father, but a counselor, a mentor. So this, we have come to the end of the lessons, and students are advised to go over the questions that follow.